Okay. Before we start, and we're live, happy birthday, Lauren, I forgot. I forgot to text message you. When this is over, I'll text message you. Anyway, so, Romans chapter 9. Okay, so, Romans chapter 9, just to jog that memory again, we're talking about predestination here. We're talking about 4 great truths that are being mentioned here in chapter 9 about predestination. The sovereign choice of God, the perfect character of God, the mercy of God, and the fairness of God are all things that we're looking at here in chapter 9. Last week, we talked about the sovereign choice of God. The sovereign choice of God.
Somebody's phone went off over there. That's what they were doing.
No, it scares me. The sovereign choice of God, talking once again about the, and he used the example of, Abraham and his descendants, giving the concept that just because you might have, a last name doesn't give you the privilege. You know what I mean? That doesn't work quite that way. To receive blessings, the blessings that you get are by God's choice to give them, or, to make it available, to provide for them. It is not something that you get based off of your merit. It's not something that you get based off of customs. It's not something that you get just because your last name might sound Hebrew. I mean, it didn't work that way. You know what I mean? So, God talked about, that following that line of people and stuff like that, how Abraham had Isaac, and the line of succession went through Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob, who changed his name to Israel. But Jacob, like Abraham had more than one kid, and so did, Isaac had more than one kid, and, and so on. So, understanding that God has a sovereign choice of how that happens, and he exercises that sovereign choice because, well, he can. And then last week we also talked about the perfect character of God, and if you remember that, we talked about the qualifications of what the supreme judge of the universe would be. Things like omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, immutable, eternal, self-existent, holy, just. All those things are things that I am not even close to being able to touch, being able to do. And if there is somebody who actually can fill that bill, which is a pretty hefty job description, then you should, it's kind of hard for me to argue with the guy who can do that, just like I use the term of the doctor. Yeah, we like to argue with the doctor about things, but the doctor's been through training. Doctor knows what's going on. You go into a doctor, it's funny because people Google stuff all the time, and they do it with cars, they do it with people, they do it with all kinds of stuff. You take your car into a mechanic, and, well, I Googled it, and they said that this is happening. And, I just had my car worked on because the starter went out. And, my wife was explaining what was going on with the car. I said, well, maybe it's just the battery. Maybe it just needs to be jump-started. Well, no, there seems to be power in there, but it's just not doing anything. It's not cranking over. And I thought, well, if it's not cranking over, then maybe it's just not, doesn't have enough power. So I went there, and I went to go jump the car, and it wouldn't work. Well, it was the starter. The starter just was froze up, and it wouldn't engage. So, if you know how to work on a car, you hit it with a hammer. And unfreeze that starter so it would start, and then I had to take it over to the mechanic. But when I explained it to the mechanic, he knew exactly what it was. I'm sitting there scratching my head going, well, it sounds like it could be this or it could be that, and then it's hard to argue with the guy who goes, no, it's your starter, and then he replaces it, and then the thing works fine. So it's kind of hard to sit there and argue with the guy. Same thing with God. It's kind of hard to argue with somebody who is omniscient and omnipresent and omnipotent and all these other things. He used the example of Moses and Pharaoh, if you remember, how they both started off the same way. They both started off the same life. going on the same path until God intervened in the life of one of them, taking him on a different path. And, the son of Pharaoh, who then became Pharaoh, himself stayed in that pagan lifestyle with that pagan upbringing and that, might makes right kind of attitude. And Moses came to him after, going through the school of hard knocks with God. And, how that happened. Now, the end of that...
Excuse me, can I ask you a question?
You could.
Is Pharaoh, was that his daddy then? That he went to, and his dad was the one that gave him all the problems about he wouldn't let his people go?
No.
That's his brother.
No, that's his brother. They
So,
grew up in the
okay.
same house.
Yeah.
They grew up as kids in the same house. And his father was the ruler at that time. And then when his father died, then
I don't think I ever
he
knew
took
that.
over. Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you ever seen the Prince of Egypt cartoon? It'll explain it to you. Not a historical archive by any stretch of the imagination, if you guys are watching. But anyway, he used that as an example. Now, it's important to remember where we left off because we're going to start there and understand where we're going. So, Paul talked about Moses and Pharaoh and how they grew up the same way. One went on a different path, the other one kept going on the path he was in, and then they converged again. And God, I know, crazy stuff up there. God, there's crazy stuff on on our live feed on the phone.
Garfield with a heart, a balloon heart.
So anyway, he said that Pharaoh, God didn't make Pharaoh choose to do evil. He didn't make him choose to go down that evil path. Pharaoh had opportunities beyond anything that most people have ever had. Living in a palace and growing up and all this kind of stuff. But he didn't make him decide to be a hard-nosed jerk about the Jewish people. But since he was going to do that, God said, okay, I'm going to let you make your decision. He made that decision, and then he, what the scriptures call, hardened him in that. And in doing that, it accomplished a couple of things. It solidified his resolve in his position, and he still, even at that point, had options, with the 10 plagues and all that kind of stuff. But by doing that, by him, by God stepping in and hardening his heart to allow him to continue in the choice he already made, all right, that he was able to show his power through the 10 plagues and all that kind of stuff. All the plagues were an attack on the religious system of the day, from Pharaoh's belief system and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, so God showed his grace, and he also showed his justice through that choice that was made. So we got to see his perfect character, God's perfect character shown through that, because he got to show his power, he got an opportunity to show his grace and his justice all kind of rolled up into one, that type of a thing. And that brings us to verses 19 through 22 of chapter 9. And this kind of continues on from where we left off, so keep that Moses and Pharaoh thing in your head. And let's go to chapter 9, verses 19 through 22. And it says there, you will say to me, why does he still find fault? For who has resisted his will? But indeed, O man, who are you to reply against God? Will the thing formed say to him who formed it, why have you made me like this? Does not the potter have power over the clay, from the same lump to make one vessel for honor and another for dishonor? What if God wanted to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with such long-suffering the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? Okay, let's hold on right there before we get too crazy on that. So let's go over this part right here, okay? Now, it starts off, Paul's kind of starting off, he just talked about the whole concept of Moses, and and talked about Pharaoh. And then anticipating a natural question that would come up. Because if they both went up the same way, God intervened in the life of Moses, and then Moses and Pharaoh hit together, boom, well, couldn't Moses have just changed his mind? But he was hardened. You know what I'm saying? So maybe
Pharaoh?
Pharaoh. So maybe he couldn't have changed his mind. So Paul's kind of anticipating that question right here in verse 19, and is say to those men, why does he still find fault, or why could God find fault in in Pharaoh, so to speak, for who has resisted his will? All right. So he's kind of anticipating that question right away. Kind of thinking, okay, so if God hardened him, then he's making Pharaoh make a choice, and that's not the case. He already made the choice. God was just holding him to that choice that he made, basically holding him to it, type of a thing. Now, God uses an Old Testament, once again, uses an Old Testament illustration to explain this kind of a concept here, so that we'll be able to understand that. In the last 2 points of understanding God's sovereignty and his and predestination, he used Old Testament examples. Now he's going to do the same thing again, so that he can try and illustrate this one, so that we can completely understand it. And he uses, he responds with this common Old Testament illustration, and he wants to point out 2 things. The first thing, looking at 19 through 21, he wants to talk about the sovereign creator, and Paul kind of points out that the sovereign creator, he doesn't have, he is not responsive to, or he doesn't have to answer to, I guess you could say, his creation. Okay? God doesn't answer to humanity. Okay? It says right here in verse 21, does not the potter have power over the clay from the same lump to make one vessel for honor, another for dishonor? Okay? If you back up to verse 20, but indeed, O man, who are you to reply against God? Will the thing that formed say to him who formed it, why have you made me like this? Okay? Paul's just kind of pointing out here, hold on, don't forget about, remember the job description thing? How can you fight against, or why are you trying to buck the system, so to speak, and causing a bunch of problems, and asking, why did God do this? God and humanity doesn't answer to God. Okay? The thing, I think it uses that concept there, that God is the creator of everything, and he's creating everything in his sovereign knowledge of it. Once again, thinking about the concept of that picture, and we can look at different parts of the picture, whereas God can see the whole thing at one time, and he's the one that orchestrated the picture, that we've used in the past couple of weeks. But you got to understand that the fact that God gave, he uses like the clay, molds the clay and however he wants to, whatever vessel he wants to use, and that type of thing. The fact that God gave us life is grace. Okay? Let's start at the very bottom, and go to where our mind doesn't want to go, but it has to go. If God gave us life, that's grace. Okay? And the fact that he gave us the ability to have some autonomy to choose things in our life, well, that's grace upon grace. The fact that he gave us life, well, that's awesome. Okay? That's grace. An unmerited favor. But the fact that he gave us the ability to choose, well, that's grace upon grace. That's the unmerited favor for the unmerited favor. That's compounded. Okay? But the fact that he, even in the bad choices that we make, provided an opportunity or the ability for us to be able to be reconciled back to God. Well, that's mind-blowing grace. That's abundant. That's super grace. Okay? The fact that he gave us life at all, that's awesome. The fact that he gave us the ability to choose in that life, that's super awesome. But to be able to, even in our bad circumstances, even in our bad choices, our bad situations, even in the middle of our sin, he gave us the ability to be reconciled back to him. Well, that's a little out of control. That's way super abundant grace. Okay? So we don't like to think of it that way because we like to stop at point 2. We have a choice. Get over yourself, okay? The fact that he lets you live, that's awesome. The fact that he gives you the opportunity to make some choices, that's pretty awesome. That's even better. But the fact that he gave you the ability to be reconciled back to him, even though your stupidity made it impossible for you, he can do anything. And that's pretty great. That's pretty crazy. Okay? So, this kind of confirms the sovereignty of God in the ability that no matter what he does and in whatever creation there is, he has the ability to create all possibilities. What seems impossible is possible for God. That it is possible for him to do that. It is possible for him to overcome where we fall short. Okay? Which is amazing. Okay? Before I keep going, any thoughts about that real fast?
Just thought that comes to mind is I hear people, and I may have even said it a time or two too, God is on my side. And it's me that better be on God's side.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's an important thing, and that's a great segue into what we're going to talk about here. Point number 2. Paul uses an Old Testament illustration. He's trying to clarify 2 points. The first point is God's participation. God gave us life. God gave us the ability to choose, and God gave us the ability to have hope beyond hope. Okay? That's God's part. The second thing he wants to clarify is us. Okay? And this is even worse. It's hard to swallow the concept that we're not in control. God's the one's in control. But we need to go one step further, and he clarifies the second point. And it's kind of an if-then statement. If God is the one that gives us grace by giving us life, and if it's grace upon grace that he lets us choose, and if it's super grace that he gives us the ability to be reconciled back to him, then we need to come to another ultimate conclusion. And that ultimate conclusion is that those of us who are, for those of us who are doomed, which is everybody, because of sin, you kind of don't have the right to complain. Okay? Because when he's giving you mercy, it's kind of hard for you to complain about the manner in which it's provided. Okay? Let me put it another way. People who need mercy don't have rights. Okay? I was watching a TV show. This guy's, he's been convicted of, death penalty or whatever. He's going to the chair. He's getting a lethal injection. Okay? And he wants out. He wants to be, they're all, it's nail biter, and they're looking at the red phone over there, like back in the old days when the red phone, it's the governor, oh, he's setting him free, you know what I mean? And they're looking at him, and they're looking at that phone and waiting for it to ring to see if this guy's going to get up. And this guy's like, I don't belong here. He's got to call. Well, guess what? You don't have any rights. You need mercy, but you don't have any rights anymore. You're already convicted. You're already guilty. You don't have rights. You can talk to your blue in the face. It don't matter. Because you don't have rights anymore. And that's kind of the concept that we need to understand. And God is using this concept of Pharaoh. Yeah?
Are you talking about the unsaved?
I'm talking about everybody. Everybody. Before they're saved. But I mean, everybody doesn't have, mankind as a general statement does not, they need mercy. We all need mercy. So to complain about the manner in which we get it is crazy. You know, God's providing it. He gave you life, and this is the part that we have to understand. God's part of it is that He gave you life, He gave you the ability to choose, and He even gave you the ability to be reconciled back to Him. The second part is our part. We are guilty. So we don't have the right to, question the manner in which the mercy is provided for us. And that's where this whole thing with Pharaoh comes into play, to illustrate it a little bit better. Pharaoh, who was the sovereign king of Egypt, you know what I mean? Not really, but I mean, that's his title. He's the big head honcho kind of guy. And he enjoys all the privileges that come along with that, the finest foods and gold everywhere and, servants to wait on his hands and feet and da-da-da-da, you know what I mean? To have that, to him, seems like grace, And when he was going through, when Moses came to him, asked him to let his people go, and he says no, and those 10 plagues came, those 10 opportunities came, he had the ability to overcome that. He had the ability to choose. And he was hard and said no, because that was the choice he already made. And you would think that with all that opportunity, that's grace upon grace, okay? And yet he still didn't take him up on it. You know what I mean? So if there was more grace extended than that, it was well undeserved. Well undeserved. Okay? So don't be confused or misled by the phrase vessels of wrath, because you got to understand, well, before we get there, verse 21, does not the potter have the power over clay from the same lump to make one vessel for honor and the other one for dishonor? I like that. Okay? So God can literally, we're talking about Moses and we're talking about Pharaoh. And there's one lump of clay because they started off together. Right? And he divided that clay in half and he made one vessel for honor and he made one for dishonor. Think about it. He made, you're growing up. The only thing I could think of at the time when I was writing this was clay pigeons. I don't know what that was all about. Clay pigeons and like water vessels or plates or something like that. So you can take the same clay and you can make clay pigeons out of them, which their whole point of existence is for destruction. Yeah, throw them in the air and somebody shoots them and claps when it blows up into a million pieces, okay? Or it could be a vessel, like a water vessel or something like that, or some kind of pot or something that created food or carried drink that sustained life and helped people out. I mean, think of it like that. I mean, he takes this one lump, like Moses and Pharaoh, and he takes some off to make it, this wonderful thing. And you would think it's the exact opposite, because instead of taking one lump and making it into a vessel for life, some kind of, maybe pot to cook in or vessel for water to be carried in to sustain life, and maybe it doesn't look as ornate or cool looking, as this other thing. He makes clay pigeons. And clay pigeons, they're all very uniform, they're all looked together, they're all brightly painted and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, those things are blown to pieces. While as this is sustaining life instead of destruction. You get what I mean? Couldn't think of another example. If you can think of another example, you can. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I was getting the clay pigeons thing. I was thinking about clay pigeons the other day, and I don't know. It just kind of came up. Anyway, if you can think of a better analogy, lay it on me. But the concept of the hardening is that Pharaoh chose, God allowed Pharaoh to choose his own shape. And this is kind of important, if this will help you wrap your head around this, okay? That's this concept of judicial abandonment. He wanted what he wanted. So God said, okay, you can choose, I have a shape for you guys, all right? And I'm going to take Moses over here and I'm going to shape him the way he needs to be for my plan. Pharaoh said, no, I want to make my own shape. Okay. If you want to make your own shape, you shape yourself however you want to shape it, and then I will harden you. Just like when you cook clay and you harden it into whatever it's supposed to be. That's what God did. If that's the shape you want to be in, let me fire you up and get you set to do that. Okay? God didn't make him choose that shape. God didn't tell him that was the shape he had to have. He let him make his own shape. Whereas Moses, he shaped him a different way. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about predestination and the sovereignty of God and his mercy. Okay? He's bestowing mercy on people, and he's willing to bestow mercy on anybody. But you've got to understand, you don't deserve mercy. But God, the fact that he gave you life is wonderful. The fact that he gives you the ability to choose is even more wonderful. But you have the ability to choose that wrong shape, you know? All right? Which is the bad thing. But even when you make that wrong shape, God still has that super grace, which can reshape you or redo you or mold you into a vessel that's best suited for him. You know, the potter has that ability. And then when we do that, we don't need to complain about how we might not look like all the rest of the teacups on the shelf. Well, you started making your own shape there, buddy. You know, we're getting you back to where you need to be. You know? Oh, I thought you were going to do it.
It's there.
All right. So, does anybody have any thoughts or comments? Does that explain things to you, or is that confusing to you? I don't want that to be confusing to you. Does that make sense to you? About the mercy of God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? All right. Well, right on. That was good. Clay pigeon. It worked out. I didn't know how that was going to work out, but right on. And that brings us to the last part. We'll talk about this last part here. 23 through 33, through the end of the chapter, basically. Oh, we got good time. All right. So understanding that Paul doesn't actually, before we move on, I forgot, I made this note. Paul is also stating something. He doesn't state it outright, but it's implied. Okay? And that, what he's implying is that, just like in James 1, God doesn't compel anyone to sin. Like, he doesn't come right out and say this. I've said it, but this verse doesn't actually come right out and say it, but it's heavily implied. God doesn't compel people to sin. God doesn't make anyone sin. He doesn't encourage people to sin. That's not what he's about. Okay? But he does allow people to make choices, and those choices can bring about adverse effects to your life. But God can still use those things in a way that can bring honor and glory to him and bring about his plan in some positive way. Okay? Those things are something that he's mentioned before, but he's carrying that implication, I guess you could say, through this passage. I wanted to bring that up because it might come up again later. Okay. Verse 23 through the end of the chapter, we're talking about the last area of predestination, which talks about the fairness of God. Okay? So, verse 23 through 33, through the end of the chapter, it says, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he had prepared beforehand for glory, even those who he called not of Jews only, but also of Gentiles. And he says also in Hosea, I will call them my people, who are not my people, and her beloved, who is not my beloved. And it shall come to pass in the places where it was said to them, you are not my people, there shall be called sons of the living God. Isaiah also cries out concerning Israel, though the number of children of Israel has been sent, the children of Israel being as the sand of the sea, the remnant will be saved, for he will finish the work and cut it short in righteousness. because the Lord will make a sort of work upon the earth, will make short work upon the earth. And as Isaiah said before, unless the Lord of the Sabbath had left us a seed, man, I can't read today, had left us a seed, we would have become like Sodom, and we would have been made like Gomorrah. What shall we say then? That Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained to righteousness, even the righteousness of faith. But Israel, pursuing the law of righteousness, has not attained the law of righteousness. Why? Because they did not seek it by faith, but as it were by the works of the law, for they stumbled at the stumbling stone, as it is written, Behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone, the rock of the offense, and whoever believes on him will not be put to shame. Okay, man, that was tough because I couldn't read it there. I don't know what the deal was. It was a little rough there. All right, so verses 23 and 24 answer the question implied in verse 22. In verse 22, it says, what if God wanted to show his wrath and to make his power known, enduring with such long-suffering the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? Once again, where you don't want you to be confused about that vessels of wrath, he's talking about the creation of what he's doing and how he's going to make that happen. But he answers that question here. Why does the Lord do what he's doing? Why does the Lord endure with such patience the vessels who are made for destruction? Well, in other words, what he's saying is, why does he allow those who are destined for destruction continue on this destructive path? Well, first off, God exists outside of time. Okay? He exists outside of time, and we are the ones that progress through it. He can, once again, we get the picture there. He can see the whole thing at one time. We're progressing through that picture, and we progress through time. Those who are elected to have mercy are destined for glory and will emerge at birth sinful. Like everybody starts the same way. Alright? So you're going to start off sinful no matter what, but you may be destined for, to be a vessel of life and not a vessel of destruction. But you're all going to start the same way, and that's the way it goes. And we exist in that same time before receiving grace, and before we receive the Holy Spirit. We all start off in that same manner, okay? And that's, once again, we're talking about the fairness of God. So the Lord has determined to allow the process of time to unfold and the people in it to unfold in time for the sake of having us go through those things, to have those experiences and to create these opportunities. Because all of creation is seeing the progress of mercy given through unworthy vessels, and they're given or transformed, I guess you could say, into vessels of life and not vessels of destruction. So, in other words, you kind of all start off the same way, but somehow, you get shaped in a little different manner here, a little bit more pressure here, a little bit more swooping here, and you turn into something beautiful versus, what could otherwise be. You know what I mean? So we all start off that same way, unworthy. We talked about Jacob. Jacob was totally, seemingly unworthy, and yet he, God shaped him up and got him flying right, and wound up changing his name to Israel. Okay? So we all kind of start the same way, unworthy vessels, but God kind of does what he needs to do, and he gets us going in there. And the Lord allows the progress of time. God allows the progress of time for that to happen, because even though, I don't know, you gotta picture it in your head, I guess you could say. I don't know if you've ever made anything on a potter's wheel, where you spin it around. You got a big lump of clay. Big lump of clay is just like any other lump of clay. It looks like a lump of clay. And God, over time and manipulation, everything starts that same way. The big useless lump of clay, all it's worth is thrown at your brother. That's all it's good for. But over time, pressure, molding, shaping, it can become something wonderful. Okay? Well, that's as we progress through time, that's how it happens. We all start the same way. God molds it and shapes it, progresses it in the same way, and makes it into whatever is needed. And He allows this to happen. Now, sometimes when you're shaping that clay, sometimes you have to cut stuff away. You know what I mean? Like sometimes not all the clay is used. Sometimes maybe you might cut away a portion of the clay or a swoop out of the side of the clay, to get rid of it, to make the whatever it is you're making. If you're making a pitcher, to make it better usable for whatever is needed. You know what I mean? Maybe you need to cut a portion of it out to make like a pour spout, and maybe that part will be taken away and used later for maybe a handle, or maybe it won't be used at all. It's just taken away, that type of a thing. So we need to understand that whatever remains from being taken away is what God had intended to use the whole time. Okay? Sometimes when you're making something and you have to kind of take away this part, take away this part, take away this part, and shape the rest of it the way it needs to be. That's where we get this concept of the elect that we have mentioned here. Okay? The elect. God knows who has been elected to receive mercy and who is not. We don't. So God allows us to progress through time, starting all off, we all start off the same way, and He lets us progress through time and getting molded and shaping and all that kind of stuff. And He sees the hearts of men and women on the inside. We look at the outside. God knows what's going on the inside, and He will judge what's going on in the inside. We look at the exterior. Okay? So like I said, like the concept of the clay pigeon and the vase may be made and maybe doesn't look as ornate, or maybe doesn't look as cool, and doesn't have the cool painting like the clay pigeon does with the fluorescent, painting on it and stuff like that. But this one will last forever, and it will supply things that give life, whereas this one is only going to last, as soon as somebody shoots it and it blows up. You know what I mean? So when someone appears to be a lump of clay, it just means that there's a possibility that they are going to be a vessel of mercy. They just haven't had the right shaping. Okay? Paul is a great example of that. Paul was a murderer. He used to go in and drag people from their homes who was following after the word and put them to death. And he thought he was doing the right thing. That didn't work out. But he allowed the progression of time to happen and over these things. And then through a little bit of pressure, a little bit of reshaping, He made him into a vessel for life, not destruction. Okay? So we see kind of the reshaping. Okay? So if you look at verse 25, Paul uses, once again, some Old Testament things to help us to understand what's going on. So in verse 25, Paul returns to the question of the Jews being recalled, some of the Jews, by recalling some of Hosea and Isaiah's words. These two Old Testament prophets tell of two tales about two vessels of Israel. Now, I don't know if you remember this back in the day, but the nation of Israel actually divided itself. Instead of being the nation of Israel, it divided itself into two, kingdoms. The kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. Okay? They divided themselves in that way. Oh, right there. Right there on the wall. The fifth dispensation, you can see Jeroboam and Rehoboam and how they divided themselves. Okay? I got little visual aids here. Look at that. They were divided. Okay? And they were the nation of Israel, but they divided themselves. 10 tribes went north, 2 tribes stayed south. Okay? And the 10 tribes that went north were crazy. Okay? They didn't follow after God. They didn't care about God. They did whatever they wanted to do. They did whatever they felt like doing. They did not follow after God and had problem after problem after problem. And they were warned about it, and they still kept going. The nation of the kingdom of Judah, they had their problems too, don't get me wrong, but they had a better track record following after God. Okay? Now they were all the nation of Israel, but only one of them received favor, which was Judah in the end. All right. So you'll see here that he's recalling these two different kind of things that are going on, and he's talking about how the Assyrians, right there, the picture right above it. Look at that. See, I've got all kinds of little pictures here. You can see how the Assyrians came and took over the northern kingdom, all right, from Jeroboam, the kingdom of Israel, okay, because they were doing their own thing. God tells them, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. They kept doing it. Boom. Assyria comes in, wipes them out. Okay? Wipes them out. All right? But then you still see that there was a remnant from the kingdom of Judah that remained. Because even though they weren't doing exactly what they were supposed to do, God still spared some of them. And even though Babylon came in and took them over, Babylon came and took them over and took them captive. Okay? And kept a remnant of people alive. So we're talking about this shaping thing, right? Well, you've got this big lump of clay, and you're making this and you're making that. I don't need this part, so you kind of take some parts off and you remold it and reshape it. I don't need that part, take that off. The stuff that's not going to be necessary or not helpful to the overall working of what he's going to make out of this clay, those things don't last. But a remnant is left over to reshape, and to rebuild, and to make something into whatever the potter sees necessary. Okay? This is the concept, I guess you could say, of the fairness of God. Okay? God is the potter, and he has the ability to shape, to make, and to remake whatever he wants. And he has the ability to move and remove whatever it is that he wanted to do. You know what I mean? After decades of captivity in Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, there was a remnant that was returned again back to Jerusalem, back to where they needed to be. You know what I mean? There was still a remnant that still was around. There's still a remnant that was there. So we're talking about these two vessels, one of destruction, one of life. Both of them, unfortunately, didn't heed the warning, I guess you could say, of God. But one of them ultimately got wiped out. And the other one, a remnant, or still a part of it, was left and made. And this is the fairness of God. Once again, the fact that he gave us life is important. That's grace. The fact that he gave us the option to make choices, that's grace upon grace. But the ability that for him to allow some of us to be reconciled back to him, well, that's super grace. Okay? And, God set up the 12 tribes of Israel so that they could be the ultimate target group, the ultimate group of people to be able to show or showcase what God can do in their lives. They were supposed to go around and show people how to live and what to do and how to be. And they screwed that up royally. So did God scrap the whole thing? No, he didn't scrap the whole thing. There was still a remnant that he kept and used and continued on. So if you see that big fat line that goes through there, you see it go, and the big fat line that goes through there shows how it goes through the line of Judah and goes through Babylon and continues off the page, because it gets connected to another page that I don't think I have up there. So Sorry about that. Anywho, God makes that choice to carry that through. Once again, understanding the concept that there was God, mankind, all of mankind. It was everybody. And then one man's sin, through one man, sin entered the world. Went from everybody to one guy. Now, on the opposite side, all of mankind is now sinful. Okay? So instead of all of mankind walking in the coolness of the day with God, being able to be together with God, and being in that joy and loving relationship with God, because of one man, it all got ripped to pieces, and now all of mankind is on the opposite side. Okay? So God then started using the faith of God and his plan of God to start whittling it down, trying to show people that their faith and obedience can be the key to everything. Okay? And he whittles it down from all of mankind to part of mankind to one man's, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to 12 tribes, to 2, to 1, to a family line, to a household, to one man again. And that one man brings life back to all of mankind, restoring us back to what God wanted in the first place. Okay? So if you look at it, we have the ability through God's word to be able to look at all this garbage that I have on the wall. On all these different timelines and dispensations and administrations and things, we can see how all these things work together and how God's plan was. But God lets time unfold for the progression of these things, and even though you don't understand them, even though you don't know how it's going to turn out, God does. And you should be thankful, because his fairness is going to come through. Why? Because we're at a place now that's unprecedented. Unprecedented. All it takes is believe in your heart, confess with your mouth, Christ is Lord, and the Holy Spirit comes upon you, seals you, and now you become a citizen of heaven. And that's it. Okay? It's unprecedented. The Bible tells us that Abraham believed, and it was a part. Abraham had faith. He believed, and it was part of him to righteousness. There were a few people that did that. But it was hard to do. And now, there isn't a worry about falling out of favor with God. There isn't a worry about, of any badness happening. There isn't any worry about whether or not I'm worthy for the gift that was given to me. You know what I mean? Because now God has sealed me with the Holy Spirit. Now, boom, I am in his family, and that's it. So it's kind of difficult for me as an individual to, when I'm going through issues and problems in my life, to look at God and go, what are you doing? Why do I have to go through this? Why is this, if I'm really your child, why am I having to go through this? Well, there's a little pressure here, there's a little molding there, and he's going to get you into the exact vessel that he needs you to be. All right? But that's his plan and his right. Okay? And there's something way bigger involved than we could ever imagine. And, like I said, we can look back in history and see how God worked out his plan through all this stuff that I've got here on the wall. But the amazing thing is this plan was his all along. And the fact that we get to be part of it, the fact that he gave us life, that's wonderful grace. The fact that he gave us to choose him or not him, and the opportunity to be reconciled back to him is magnificent. The fact that I get to be part of this plan, super grace. Super grace. It's kind of hard for me to throw stones at the guy who saved my rear end from the fire.
Well, we're all guilty of saying, why, Lord, why?
Oh, sure.
Why is this happening to me? But the thing that comes to my mind is that he never judges us. He's always there. He's always the same. I think, gosh, is the Lord going to be angry with me because I'm having these thoughts?
Yeah.
He doesn't.
Right. Well, understand, this is kind of geared a little bit towards, chapter 9 is geared a little bit towards Israel, okay, towards Paul's kind of people, as he mentions it, okay. If you look at verse 32, it brings us to, back it up to verse 31, but Israel, because he's talking to them, pursuing the law of righteousness, has not attained the law of righteousness. All right? Why? Because they didn't seek it by faith. You know, they just assumed, well, I'm an Israelite. You know, I got what I needed. I'm good. You know, but that wasn't the case, and God was pointing this out. That's not how it holds out. You know, and I think we in this life do that. We don't know if we're worthy. We don't know if we're accepting. We don't know, man, I've screwed up so much. How could God care to love me? And we're all guilty of that. Absolutely. You know? But that's the beauty part of it. My decisions to do bad things doesn't affect God. Okay? My inability to accept him and his plan all the time doesn't affect God. My inability to execute his plan doesn't affect God, because he'd still have done what he did for me regardless. He loved me, he cared for me, he died, he sent his son to die for me, he rose him from the dead on the third day, and that alone was done to give me hope beyond my own hope. Okay? It doesn't matter what I think. It only matters what he thinks. He's the one that loves me. Whether I think I'm worthy of it, whether I think I deserve it, that doesn't matter. It's the fact that I have it. You know? So it kind of takes away the whole question of why. Why? Why doesn't matter? You know? We have those insecurities because we're human and we do those things. God's not sitting there going, why? He's just saying, I love you. Come here. You know? Does that make sense? I hope I explained that all right. It's kind of a weird one there. This whole last section there. Any questions? Did it confuse you any? Were you confused about any part of it? I hope it all came together at the end to try and help you to understand what I was talking about, or what it's talking about here, I guess you could say. Yes?
Me again.
Yes, that's okay.
Well, I was reading an article that I had at home about righteousness, and it said, in parentheses, it said right relationship to God, and that's been very helpful to me. That when I see righteousness in the scripture, I substitute right relationship to God, and it makes sense.
Okay.
More
That's
sense,
good.
I guess.
Right relationship, yeah.
Yeah.
The righteousness of God, the right relationship with God.
Yes.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. I like that. We cannot impart righteousness. We cannot impart a right relationship. Only God can do that. So, if God provides for us righteousness, He provides for us a right relationship, and we just have the opportunity to take part in it. He's the one that gives the provision. So I like that. Anybody else? Any other thoughts, comments, questions? I hope that made sense. It was kind of a crazy idea. And we will then begin chapter 10 next time. Unless anybody's got any last minute questions, Sherry.
Explain the Pharaoh thing to me.
Okay.
Start with Pharaoh. When Moses was born, okay, Mom and the daddy, the Pharaoh's daughter came and got him.
Yeah, floated him in the water.
Right.
She
Okay.
found it.
So, so then Moses says when he finally went to the palace, wasn't that Pharaoh's daughter? Wasn't that her daddy?
What?
The Pharaoh,
The
yes,
Pharaoh's daughter.
yes, the Pharaoh that was enrolled in was her daddy, and she had a brother
Right.
who later became the Pharaoh.
Right.
Yeah,
That
but where
Moses
is that? Is that in just history? Is that in my Bible?
Yeah. Have you seen? There's this movie out called
No,
Ten
I
Commandments
haven't
with
seen
Charlton
it.
Heston. You haven't seen that one?
I don't know, probably a long time ago, but I want to know where is that in here?
I'll show you. We'll show you. Not right now on live on Facebook, but I'll show it to you.
Okay.
I had never put it together like that until you brought it out.
Oh yeah.
But then when you brought it out, and I got to thinking, I was like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the whole concept, is that they grew up together. You know.
Well, when you said that last week, I thought, grew up together? How could they grow up together?
Because they grew up together.
I know you're saying that now. I just need a little help on that. I don't
Okay.
know.
That's
I
okay.
never heard that before.
Anywho, any other questions other than the lineage of Pharaoh? Okay, let's pray and then we'll be done. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this chance that we have to look at your word and to understand the complexity of the concept of your sovereignty and predestination and all those things. It's tough for us because we're linear. We think of things time-wise. We think of things beginning and end and all those kinds of things. Whereas you are separated from time. You don't see things the same way we see them. You see everything at once and unfold it as we progress through time. Dear Lord, help us to understand the true importance of your sovereignty, and that is that you are God. You are the creator of all. You are the right ruler, and you have a plan. And that plan will unfold to your honor and glory, and I am thankful to be part of it. Dear Lord, please allow me to be challenged to be part of it. Make myself available to be part of it. To be willing to be part of it. Dear Lord, thank you so much for the plan. Thank you so much for your sovereignty. Thank you so much for knowing and being. Even though my shortcomings come and my scope of things is limited, you are not. So, dear Lord, I ask for your wisdom, your strength, your courage in the times needed when your plan unfolds and I can be part of that. Thank you so much for this time that we can be here together, and help us to truly honor and glorify you in it. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Can you tell me? Oh, he's stuck.